Just from my own perspective, I think it's fair to say that the trade union movement has a very valuable part to play as a social partner in the whole discussion around Brexit in terms of informing us, and we welcome you here today in that context. And it's an obvious statement, I suppose, in the least, that it's a worrying time for workers here in this country, but equally I think it's a very worrying time in the UK for workers, because you'll appreciate, I'm sure you know, that over the last 40 years the EU has set a fairly high bar in terms of worker and employer standards and how they should operate. There's been a significant contribution at that level, and with the advent of Brexit, what's your view? Have you discussed with your colleagues, I'm sure you have, in Congress in the UK, in terms of the threat that may have and the implications, that the follow-through that may have on this country in terms of, will it drive down costs in the UK? Will it exacerbate the potential threat to our industries here? And you instanced, as we know, the mushroom industry. So I suppose just generally the views of your colleagues in Congress in the UK. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. King, yeah.
Here with that, Deputy Collins, I think there's a number of things just to bring to your attention on it. To answer your question directly, yes, of course we are in contact with our colleagues in the TUC and the STUC and the WTUC, because there are circumstances for the TUC which they didn't ever expect to be engaged in, but there they are. And actually the General Secretary of the TUC did have a meeting here with us, and then the Minister for Foreign Affairs met the General Secretary as well. Now, one of the key issues, of course, is how will hard-won rights and protections, mainly derived from EU legislation and directives, be maintained. And there are very worrying signs already in relation to this. Firstly, you have, as you know, in the UK, the British Prime Minister has indicated the big repeal bill, and what actually happens when all of the current legislation is repealed, to be replaced then by what? Clearly there are issues and people there's huge uncertainty, but people are guessing, and that's one piece. But if you look at the situation here in Ireland, we already have submissions being made, particularly relating to manufacturing industry, by IBEC, who are saying that manufacturing workers, in their view, and they link themselves into the National Competitiveness Council and so on to have these figures, and they make the point that, in their view, an average manufacturing worker here is earning £6 more than the counterpart in the UK. They are arguing that labour cost is one of the key pieces for them in terms of competitiveness, and that if they are to continue, and they want to continue obviously to trade with the UK, then this issue will have to be dealt with. And they quote or reference labour costs and capital costs to be the two big main issues for them. However, they major in terms of, in any submissions they make, they major in terms of the labour costs. So they then relate that a great deal, obviously, to currency fluctuation. And as you know, in the last number of weeks, there has been quite a lot of fluctuation. It may, at this stage, possibly be settling a little bit in the last week, but certainly in the previous weeks, it has been quite volatile. Now, they make the judgment that if the currency went to a value of 90 cents, then you would be talking about an hourly rate, they believe, of a difference of about £7.50. So that takes you into a space where you know where this is going then. Where this is going is actually workers will have probably, will either be involved in some cases in a race to the bottom. So if you want to continue to trade, if you want to do business, the only way you're going to do this is at the lowest possible price. That's the argument, and these arguments are being made. To take Dr. Healy's point in relation to displacement, where jobs in a manufacturing outlet in one part of the country. However, maybe the financial services produce jobs, and this displacement piece, which is no use to the people who are losing the manufacturing job in one part of the country. All the statistics point to the fact that the jobs we are talking about are, in a lot of cases, Indigenous Irish industry, in a lot of cases, regionally based. So actually, particularly in a manufacturing case, we could face a very, very strong shock, depending on how this pans out. And from our perspective, it was very early in the day when we met the Minister for Foreign Affairs with the TUC General Secretary, but we made the point to him that we need him to say that he is going to argue on behalf of Irish workers that part of this deal is actually not to produce a race to the bottom, and that the directives that apply in the EU will have to continue to apply here, and that this is not going to have to be, it's not going to be done, not going to be delivered on the backs of people who are either going to, on the one hand, lose their jobs, or on the other hand, have cuts and income loss as a result of it. It's clearly, from our perspective, in relation to all of that, it's very worrying. Now, you did say in your opening remarks there, Deputy, finally, you did say that, you felt the trade union movement had a lot to say on this, and indeed you indicated that it was proper that we would be involved. But I would just cite to you that that's not necessarily generally the practice now at the moment. For instance, there's a consultative committee up in the Department of Agriculture. I've had to write to them and say, they say it's a consultative stakeholder consultation committee. Everyone in the place is at it, except anybody who represents a worker. And there are thousands of unionised workers covered by collective agreements in the food and beverage industry who are all being just talked about up there. But you have farmers in, you have producers in, you have the small firms people in, you have all of these people in, and not a sign of a worker anywhere in the place. We weren't alerted to the consultative. We had nobody said to us, we're setting this up. We found it out in the usual way that you do with these things, and I've made contact with the Secretary General of that department saying, what are your intentions in relation to inviting us? Because clearly, as has often been the case in history, and I've been involved in a fair number of them myself over the years, when these companies get into severe difficulty, very often the trade union are the only group that will go in actually and try and save the day. And I don't say that out of empty or vacuous claim. I mean, you only look at something like Bosch and Lomb, for instance. Only there was a collective agreement and the trade union movement went in and was able to hammer out something, they were gone. And there was a huge loss to this country in terms of jobs. So the notion that people would be, and I was in that myself, and I know the detail of it, and the notion that people would be in consulting one another, and the people most likely to lose in this are I found that I don't understand why the Department of Agriculture, for instance, has taken that approach. We hope that we have something positive to offer to this. We hope that because of the experience we have in this, manufacturing in Ireland is actually quite strongly unionised. So we would know, Dr. Healy mentioned in relation to retraining and so on, we would have very good insight into all of that. Why people wouldn't want to tap into that is beyond me.
Thank you very much, Ms. King.
Just, I suppose, to make you aware, some of the other groups that were in here presenting to us, they've all mentioned part of the response to Brexit is market diversification, which we all clearly understand. And that's something that they're going to try and support. The different agencies are going to try and support SMEs. But it was also mentioned, and I made a note of it actually, because it struck me, that it'll require hard work, reduced costs, and also a move to a sterling cost base, which I would interpret as moving outside of this jurisdiction, either to the north of Ireland or to mainland UK for businesses that are particularly reliant on access to the UK market. So I don't know if you have a comment in relation to that, or how you would view that, particularly if it's going to be a strategy adopted by some of our state agencies, because that will ultimately lead to job losses in this jurisdiction and displacement, or not so much displacement, but at least job losses? And secondly, you mentioned in your document the role of the trade union movement in Brexit negotiations. Do you feel you haven't been involved? You cited the instance, Patricia, in relation to the Department of Agriculture. Do you feel the response, how do you feel the response from government has been to date, and do you feel that you have been involved enough in terms of the whole of government response that's required? Thanks.
Yes, a very important question, Deputy, and I think actually that perhaps here in Ireland we haven't fully realised yet the strategic implications of Brexit. I'm not just talking now about job risks and the immediate economic impact, but we are likely to be in a 27-member EU without the United Kingdom, with huge pressure coming on in areas of not just corporation tax, but right across the spectrum of social and fiscal policy. And I think we are going to have to make a decision which broad model are we going to go with. And if we try to proceed at two levels of approximating a sterling cost base, you've mentioned this point and it's a crucial point, I'm not convinced that we can do that actually in conjunction with moving towards a more call it European norm of taxation, of enterprise policy, and the way that that's going to play out in the labour market. Our costs are, in fact, below the average in EU 15 countries, developed traditional EU economies in the Eurozone. And yes, in some cases, our costs are higher than in the UK. And when I say labour costs, I'm referring also to employer social contributions, which is a big element in other European countries. So I think we have a choice to make. It will be a very painful choice. In some cases, it may mean moving away from dependence on UK markets and actually going towards the higher skill, higher productivity, higher cost, but then equilibrated by higher productivity, and in the long run, a different strategic position in the market. And I think that will require very careful planning. It's understandable that there will be huge pressure from some sectors and producers to say, look, we're going to have to follow the UK downwards in terms of costs, in terms of taxation rates, and again, the budget recently would have illustrated responses to that. But I think that's actually strategically, in my view, the wrong direction to go in, and we're going to end up in a place that is increasingly incompatible with the rest of the EU. Thanks.
Okay, just in relation to that market diversification as well, Deputy, I mean, there are a number of scenarios that could arise here, but you could actually end up where companies are taking both the advice and indeed maybe even getting subvention to help to diversify market-wise, all of which leads them to a place that they get Irish government money to do that and they end up taking the job somewhere else. That, that is something that clearly would be just one of the consequences of this. But anyway, our judgment is in relation to the whole government approach. I think that we would want to see this in the round happening, that it's not just something that Brexit is so important, it's going to encompass so many areas of Irish life that we think it has to be a whole government approach. To date, we have been invited in the planning pieces that there were meetings held in the Department of the Taoiseach, and we took part in those in the planning of this. As in up to the date of the referendum outcome. Since then, I think there has been one meeting in the Department of the Taoiseach that we have taken part in, but we have not been engaged in any other more in-depth discussions anywhere, and we haven't been invited. If you were to ask me, are they going on? We suspect they are. In fact, we'd probably even hope that they are, but we don't know where, we don't know with whom, and we think that the trade union movement has a big role to play in it, and it's negative from our perspective that they're not engaging with us in this.